Her grandfather lifted his glass at her 28th birthday dinner and asked a single question. He asked Claire why she hadn't told anyone how she'd used her $3 million trust fund, the one he'd set up for her when she was 3 years old. The table went silent, not the polite kind of silence, the kind that falls when something irreversible has just been said out loud. Forks stopped moving. Lily's laugh died mid-breath. Her father set his wineglass down too fast. It clinked against the table. Claire didn't understand the question. That was the worst part. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't playing along. She leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper, and said she'd never received anything. No trust fund. Nothing. Her grandfather's smile disappeared. Him knock across the table. Her mother's face did something Claire had never seen before. It cracked. Not in grief, not in surprise, in the specific, practiced way a person's face cracks when a lie they've maintained for 25 years finally hits air. Claire didn't know that yet, but she felt it. Temperature of that silence. The way no one at the table moved to correct her grandfather. The way no one said, "Of course you did." That's the moment the ground shifted. She just didn't know how far it was going to fall. She walked out of the restaurant before anyone could follow. The Bellevue air was cold and sharp. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She just walked down the pavement with her hands in her coat pockets and her breathing too controlled to be natural. That's what Claire did. She contained things. She'd been doing it her whole life, absorbing the shocks, smoothing over the edges, carrying things quietly so no one else had to. Her phone buzzed. Jade. Her roommate's message was short. "How was dinner?" Claire stood on the pavement outside a restaurant full of her family and typed nothing back. She called instead. When Jade picked up, there was no small talk. Claire just said she needed to come home. Jade didn't ask questions. That was enough. On the drive back to Seattle, Claire kept running the moment on a loop. Her grandfather's voice, his expression as it shifted, the folder that had appeared from nowhere, placed on the table by a man in a tailored suit. She hadn't looked at it. She'd been too blindsided to look at it, but she'd seen the thickness of it, the weight of it landing on the white tablecloth, and she'd seen her mother's hands go still the second it appeared. That detail wouldn't let her go. To understand why any of this mattered, you'd have to know who Arthur Monroe was to Claire, not the version of him other people saw, the quiet patriarch, the man of few words, the version Claire knew when she was 6 years old. He'd walked her along the shoreline near the family lake house. The water was gray that day. She remembered the sound of it. He'd held her hand and told her that no matter what happened in life, no matter how people disappointed her, she'd be taken care of. He'd made sure of it. She hadn't understood what he meant. She was 6. But she'd held on to it the way children hold on to things that feel important before they understand why. Arthur Monroe had spent his life building something, a regional property business that grew quietly over decades. He wasn't flashy about it. He showed up to school plays in the same coat he'd worn for 20 years. He remembered every birthday. He sent handwritten notes. He asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. He was the one person in Claire's family who had ever looked at her and really seen her, not the version her mother liked to present. Not the responsible one who didn't cause problems. Her, Claire. And now he was telling her that the protection he promised, the specific, financial, documented protection, had existed her entire adult life without her knowledge. Someone had known about it, and someone had kept it from her. The inequality in Claire's family hadn't arrived all at once. It had settled in gradually, the way mold grows, invisible until it isn't. Lily was 2 years younger. She was warm, effortlessly likable, the kind of person who moved through rooms and left people smiling. Claire didn't resent her for it. That part was easy to separate. What wasn't easy was the pattern that surrounded Lily without anyone naming it. Lily's high school trip to Europe, fully funded, no discussion. When Claire had asked about a school excursion at the same age, she'd been told the family couldn't stretch to it that year. Lily's university apartment, paid in full. When Claire left for college, she was told that paying her rent would undermine her independence. Small things, taken separately. Reasonable things almost. Claire had told herself that for years. She'd told herself she was reading too much into it, that some kids got more support than others, and it wasn't necessarily sinister, that her mother just showed love differently. She'd worked harder. She'd asked for less. She'd moved into a small apartment in Seattle with Jade and built a freelance UX career from scratch, contract by contract. She paid every bill herself. She was proud of that. She'd just never questioned whether she'd had to be. That question was surfacing now. And it had teeth. There was a particular sentence Elaine Monroe used whenever Claire's name came up in conversation. She'd smile at whoever was nearby and say that Claire had always been the independent one, that she'd never needed much from them. She said it like it was a compliment. She said it like it was a personality trait Claire had been born with. What she never said was this: Claire had stopped asking because asking had never worked. The car breakdown. Claire was 24. Her car died on a highway outside Seattle at 10 at night. She had a shift the next morning. She called her mother because she had no one else. Her mother told her she was an adult. She said figuring it out would be good for her. Claire spent that night on the phone with tow services. She maxed out a credit card she spent the next 18 months paying off. A textbook situation. Second year of college. Claire was short, not extravagantly short, enough that it mattered. She asked for help with one semester's worth of course materials. Her mother said they couldn't keep bailing her out. The phrase, "keep bailing her out," landed hard. There had never been a first bailout. These weren't isolated moments. Claire understood that now, sitting in her apartment while Jade made tea and asked no questions. They were a system, a carefully maintained system, designed to convince Claire that her situation was the result of her own choices, her own shortcomings, her own character. The independence her mother praised so warmly had been engineered. And someone had pocketed the alternative. She couldn't sleep. Jade had set a mug on the bedside table and quietly closed the door. Claire lay in the dark and let the pattern complete itself. Lily's tuition, Lily's apartment, the home renovations her parents had done when Claire was in college, the kitchen remodel she'd heard about on a phone call, mentioned casually, as though money had never been a concern. It hadn't been. That was the point. Her parents had presented themselves as a family managing carefully on a comfortable income, not wealthy, not struggling, just prudent. And Claire, who asked for things and got told no, had interpreted that as the truth. She thought of something now that she hadn't given weight to at the time. The summer she was 20, she'd driven to Bellevue for a visit and found her mother redecorating the living room. New furniture, new flooring. Claire had made a joke about their luck. Her mother had smiled and said they'd saved for it. It hadn't registered then. It registered now. She sat up in the dark, reached for the mug, and stared at the wall. $3 million. Set up when she was 3. Accessible at 18. Not one word of it had ever reached her. Not a letter. Not a phone call. Not a single mention. For 25 years, something that had been meant solely for Claire had been used by 2 people who told her with straight faces that she didn't need help. She almost talked herself out of it by morning. That's what she did with hard things. She'd been doing it since she was a child. Hold it at arm's length until it seemed manageable. Then file it somewhere she didn't have to look at it. Part of her mind offered alternatives. Maybe the trust fund had conditions she didn't know about. Maybe there had been a miscommunication. Maybe her grandfather had confused dates or names. He was 81. People misremember. But then she thought of her mother's face. Not surprised, not confused, not a person watching a misunderstanding unfold, a person watching a secret surface. There's a specific look that comes from being caught in something you built carefully over a long time. Claire had never had a name for it before. She had one now. She called her grandfather at 8 in the morning. He answered before the second ring. His voice was steady and clear. He told her the office, the time. He told her to come alone. She showered. She dressed. She sat on the edge of her bed for 3 minutes looking at nothing. Then she stood up. She wasn't a person who made scenes. She wasn't a person who confronted. She'd always been the one who absorbed and adjusted and moved on. But something had shifted in the space of one dinner time, and she was done adjusting. The folder was already on the desk when she arrived. Arthur Monroe's office was on an upper floor of a glass tower in downtown Seattle. Cedar and old paper. Morning fog still clinging to the windows. He sat in a leather chair and looked at her the way he always had, like she was the only person in the room who mattered. He didn't waste time. He'd set up the trust when Claire was 3 years old. $3 million. He'd instructed that she receive full access at 18. He'd assumed for 25 years that she had. He hadn't checked. That's what he said. He hadn't checked because he trusted his own daughter to follow through. Then he slid the folder across the desk. Claire opened it. The first page was a preliminary audit. Dense columns of figures, dates going back decades, and on every withdrawal, every transfer, every payment, 2 signatures. Elaine Monroe, Daniel Monroe, Daniel Monroe. Her hands didn't shake. Not yet. She turned the pages slowly. Mortgage payments, kitchen renovation, Lily's university fees, Lily's apartment in Portland, vacations, car purchases, credit card balances, 25 years of her parents' life, itemized and funded by money that had a different name on it. Her name. Claire set the folder down on the desk. The room was very quiet. She asked her grandfather one question. How much was left? The answer was, enough. Still significant. The account hadn't been emptied. It had been drained slowly, plausibly, in ways designed not to raise flags. Arthur introduced her to Collins that morning, his lawyer, a measured man with gray hair and the stillness that suggested he'd seen worse and remained standing. He walked Claire through the audit in careful language. What the documents showed, what the legal framework looked like, what her options were. He was precise. He wasn't warm. Claire appreciated both. She spent 3 hours in that office. She didn't call her parents. She didn't text Lily. She took the copies Collins prepared and she read every page twice. The dates were the hardest part. The summer she couldn't afford textbooks. There was a transfer that month, not enormous. But there, the year her car broke down, 2 payments to a home improvement company that Claire recognized as the one her parents had used for their kitchen. These weren't coincidences. They were a calendar. Every time Claire had struggled, the money existed. It had always existed. It had simply been redirected, quietly, routinely, by 2 people who had built their comfort on the assumption that Claire would never find out. She asked Collins how long a full audit would take. He said 2 weeks for a complete picture. She told him to begin immediately, and then she asked the question he'd been waiting for. She asked whether they could call a meeting. On the way home, Lily called. Claire let it ring twice, then answered. Lily's voice was careful, not her usual warmth. Something measured in it. She said she'd spoken to their mother. She said their mother had explained that Grandpa sometimes confused financial arrangements, that there had been a family fund, that it wasn't the way Claire had understood it, that maybe everyone needed to sit down calmly and sort through the confusion. Confusion. For a moment, a very brief moment, Claire felt the pull of it, the relief available in that word. It would be easier. It would smooth everything back into place. She could let her mother reframe it. She could tell herself there'd been a misunderstanding. She could go back to Bellevue for Christmas and cut the turkey and pretend the dinner had never happened. She'd done it before. Smaller versions of this, over and over. She was almost there, almost back in the version of her life where she didn't look too closely. Then she thought of the dates on the audit pages. The month her car broke down. The month she couldn't afford her textbooks. The payment going out the same week she'd been told there was nothing to spare. Confusion. No, this wasn't confusion. This was a story her mother needed Claire to believe, and Claire had believed her mother's stories for 28 years. She wasn't going to do it again. Collins called 4 days before the scheduled meeting. He said he needed to walk her through something before it happened. She went back to the office. He opened a second folder. The preliminary audit had shown what Claire expected, a steady bleed over 2 decades. But the full review had found something else. Her parents hadn't just used the trust for household expenses. They'd funneled portions into investment accounts held under a family business structure. A structure Claire had never been told existed. The business had been registered when Claire was 19, 1 year after she should have accessed the trust. It had been used to move funds in ways that were harder to trace. Not impossible, but deliberately layered. The kind of arrangement that takes time and intention to build. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't parents dipping into something during a difficult year and meaning to replace it. Someone had sat down and designed a structure to make it harder to see. Collins said the word deliberately. Deliberately. Claire stared at the documents, the signatures, her father's handwriting across years and years of pages. She'd grown up thinking of her father as the passive one, the man who nodded through meals, who deferred to her mother on everything. She'd given him the benefit of quiet complicity, a man who went along rather than one who acted. But his name was on every document. The same hand, the same signature. He'd known, he'd signed, he'd chosen. Every single time. The meeting was a Thursday. A cold Seattle afternoon, the sky the color of brushed steel. Arthur had arranged it in a private conference room inside his building. Neutral ground, he called it. But Claire knew what it really was. A room where everything that was said would be witnessed, documented. Impossible to walk back. She arrived early. Collins was waiting. He nodded once and said nothing further. That was enough. When the door opened, her parents entered first. Elaine walked quickly, posture stiff, face arranged in its familiar arrangement, composed, blameless, slightly put upon. Daniel followed. His eyes moved around the room in the slow, searching way of someone looking for the nearest exit. Lily came last, clutching her bag, expression caught somewhere between worry and disbelief. Elaine began speaking before she sat down. Her tone was sharp and controlled, the tone of a woman who believed she could still manage this. She said there had clearly been a miscommunication, and that involving lawyers was unnecessary and hurtful. Arthur held up one hand. Elaine stopped. Collins placed the full audit on the conference table. The sound it made, deep, flat, final, silenced the room. Then he began reading, year by year, line by line, every withdrawal, every transfer, every payment made from Claire's trust fund over 25 years. Claire watched her mother's face lose its color, watched her father's jaw tighten, watched Lily go very still as Collins read out the payments for her university, her apartment, her trips. Lily hadn't known. That part was clear. The people who had were sitting right across the table. Elaine's first move was context. She said the audit was being taken out of context, that family finances were complicated, that decisions had been made collectively, in good faith during difficult years. Collins said the legal term was financial abuse of a named beneficiary. He said it the way someone states the temperature outside. Informational, unargued. Daniel spoke next. His voice was thin. He said they'd used the money for the family. He said it wasn't personal. Claire laughed. She hadn't planned to. It came out before she could catch it. She looked at her father, the quiet man, the nodding man, and told him about the night her car broke down, the credit card she'd maxed, the month she'd spent paying it back. She asked him if that had been personal. He flinched. He didn't answer. Her mother lifted her chin. She said Claire had always been independent, that she'd never asked for much. There was a version of that sentence Elaine had used Claire's whole life, polished, rehearsed, designed to sound like a compliment. Claire told her she hadn't asked, because she'd been taught that asking was a burden. Every time she'd come to them, they'd made her feel like needing help was a failing. She'd internalized that. She'd worked herself into the ground and called it character. And all along, a trust fund with her name on it had been paying for her sister's apartment. The room was very quiet after that. Arthur looked at his daughter. Claire's mother said she'd stolen from a child. Elaine's mouth opened, then it closed. Her hands were shaking. Collins slid a set of documents across the table toward Claire. Full transfer of the remaining trust assets, her parents' access, and the access of any business entity associated with them terminated permanently, effective immediately. Arthur told Elaine he was revoking her financial authority over the estate. All of it. Elaine stood up sharply. The chair scraped back hard against the floor. She told her father he couldn't do that. He told her he already had. Daniel didn't stand. He sank further into his chair, like something in him had quietly given way. He looked old in a way he hadn't looked when he walked in. Lily whispered something, a small, broken sound. She was staring at the table. She kept saying she hadn't known. Her voice cracked on it. Claire believed her. That didn't make it easier, but she believed her. Claire picked up the pen. She held it over the documents for a moment, not hesitating, just letting the weight of it settle. 28 years, 25 of them spent building a life without a foundation that had always been there. 2 jobs, maxed credit cards, skipped semesters and broken down cars, and every occasion she told herself she didn't need help. She pressed the pen to the page and signed her name. Elaine's voice broke. She said it would ruin them. She said Claire needed to think about the family. Claire looked up at her, calm, steady. She said perhaps they should have thought about the family when they spent 25 years spending money that wasn't theirs. Elaine sat back down, slowly, like her legs had stopped working. The room cleared slowly. Her parents left first. Elaine's steps were unsteady. Daniel held her arm without meeting anyone's eyes. They walked past Claire without speaking. Lily stayed behind. She stood near the door for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and said she was sorry, not explaining it, not defending anything, just that she was sorry. Claire nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a door closed either. It was a beginning of something she didn't have a name for. Over the weeks that followed, Collins completed the legal transfers. The remaining assets were secured in Claire's name. Her parents were formally advised of civil consequences if any interference occurred or additional undisclosed accounts were identified. They didn't fight it. Claire moved into a condo on the north side of Seattle. Modest, quiet, a window that looked out over the rooftops toward the water. The first night she slept there, she lay in the dark and cried. Not from grief exactly, not from relief, from the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being in a space that was entirely hers. She walked along the waterfront on a Sunday morning in late winter. Cold air, low sky, the kind of quiet that settles over a city before it fully wakes up. She thought about the shoreline, the 6-year-old who'd walked beside her grandfather and heard a promise she didn't understand yet. She understood it now. Not every promise made to a child gets kept by the people trusted to keep it, but some of them wait, buried, patient, until the right person finally brings them to light. Clare Monroe was 28 years old. She was starting over, and for the first time in her life, she was starting from solid ground.